Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Physician's Mind. I'm your host, Curtis Wilkerson, a medical student exploring how high performers think, learn, and push human potential. Today, we're going to be asking a simple but powerful question. What if students don't actually struggle with chemistry, but what if we've just been teaching it in the wrong language? My guest is Dr. Colleen Kelley, creator and founder of Kids Chemical Solutions, a groundbreaking comic book curriculum that's redefining how we learn science. Dr. Kelley earned her PhD in chemistry by the age of 24, and she spent decades teaching at the University of Arizona. She also coined the term molecular literacy, the idea that chemistry isn't just formulas and equations, but rather a language built on story, pattern, and meaning. In this conversation, we're going to unpack the moment that she realized chemistry education was broken, how storytelling can rewire our understanding, and what this means for the next generation of physicians, scientists, and innovators. Let's get into it. Dr. Kelley, how are you today? Thank you for joining me.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you finished your PhD at 24. So you clearly understood chemistry very early. But at what point did you realize that your students weren't just struggling, they were almost speaking a different language?
I think, Curtis, when I first had my assistant professorship and I walked into an auditorium of 200 plus students taking organic chemistry, and they would come to office hours and they would say, Dr. Kelley, why are you drawing all these sticks? And I'm like, what? I'm like, those are bonds. And so just from the get-go, just this disconnect between what I was drawing and what they were seeing. And it really took me pause to say, I'm a first generation college student. As we discussed prior to the show, I was an Army soldier, so I had an ROTC scholarship to pay for my education. And I had no background in science. I didn't grow up with a chemistry kit in my hand. And I thought, how am I, as a first gen college student, how did I see this? And it just made me kind of step back and say, they're not seeing what I'm seeing. So what do I do about all of this?
Okay. And what was the moment that made you say something is broken in the way we teach science? Because you definitely realized there was a disconnect. What was the turning point?
I think it was really a over time effect where I just kept realizing that failure rates in science were very high compared to the rest of the colleagues that I had on campus. And also, I think it was just anytime I would go to like a social event and they would say, oh, you teach chemistry, you must be like really smart in these things. And I never considered myself like that. Like I just thought I was just a regular person.
And tell us about the beginning of your company, your brand. Tell us about the development of that whole deal.
Well, that came out of necessity years later. So I was 25 years into teaching in higher ed when I had been dabbling for a couple years in writing a textbook, and I really wanted to put these stories that I had been creating on my own into the textbook. And I thought everybody would want to purchase this textbook, right? Like, who wouldn't want a textbook that had integrated stories into it? And of course, no one wanted it. So it was then the pandemic hit, and I took time out to explore what it means to write children's stories, what it means to write comic books, the different genres, the different skills. So I had to basically teach myself to become a children's author and a comic book author with no skill set prior to that. So I became a learner and realized that the best way for me to communicate what I was trying to show was through comic books, because the way the panels are constructed, I could insert images of molecules if I needed to. It was heavy in dialogue, so a comic book is good for that, and also heavy in images. So I think the two kind of just went together really nicely. And so I wrote my first one and then just kept writing more and more.
And so when you first had this idea and you decided this is what you were going to do, what was the goal? What was the end outcome? Once it was all said and done, what did you want to accomplish? And what have you accomplished thus far?
I'm still on that goal. So what I did is I scaffolded the learning objectives found in Gen Chem, or general chemistry. So I just picked up an AP chemistry, general chemistry textbook, one that I had taught from years, and took that sequence of learning objectives, and each chapter then became a comic book. So I wanted to cover first semester Gen Chem if I could, kind of end with thermo, maybe a little bit of equilibrium or something like that. And so I'm still getting there. As a new entrepreneur too, so not only was I a new author, I had to go to several of these entrepreneur boot camps to learn about, what it is to be a starter or a founder, right, and have a startup. So I did run out of funding at Comic Book 4, so I have 6 more planned. And, you're just trying to do everything all at once. I'm a solopreneur, so in addition to writing, creating, teaching, marketing, and then I'm also trying to, raise funds and seek a sustainable business from this.
Absolutely. That is the ever-present challenge for entrepreneurs, just always trying to find a new way, always confronting new problems. That's how we do it. So you've said that chemistry is one of the gatekeepers to medicine, and that gate is locked for some students. Why is that?
I think it's locked for almost most students, right? We have about a 50% failure rate for organic chemistry nationally, and that is failure could be a C, right? Because a C is probably not going to get you into medical school, at least my experience writing hundreds of letters over 30 years. So that could be a C, that could be a drop, that could be a withdrawal. It could be any of those things. So failure means just not completing the course successfully is how I'm going to frame that statistic. And that statistic goes up to 80% for underserved or represented students. So it is a gatekeeper, right? If you look at those numbers, there's no other course on campus that accepts those numbers. And organic is just systematically, everyone shrugs their shoulders. I mean, it's even in Goodwill Hunting how hard organic is, right? So everyone has picked up on it and we all just say, oh, well, that's how it is. Eventually I became a loud old lady and said, I don't think that's right anymore. So it can't be right. It's just unacceptable statistics. So it is a gatekeeper, and the reason being is I'm doing a lot of intensive tutoring today with students globally, from anywhere from Harvard to University of Arizona to all of different schools. And there's not enough time spent on communication. How do we communicate? What does an arrow actually mean? Where does it start? Where does it end when you're drawing a mechanism? How do we draw a molecule? What does a Newman projection mean when it looks like a peace sign to most students, right? And don't even get me started on chair and boat cyclohexane. And these things go fast in lecture, and the students are not literate in the drawing. So drawing is a form of communication, a form of literacy. And then you add on top of that the vocabulary, like nucleophile, electrophile, things that don't even make any sense, right? Nucleophile is not an intuitive word. You're not going to say, oh, I know what that does. And then we all of a sudden start calling a hydrogen a proton, and no one's tells them what that is. So when I do my research now into how much confusion there is around the language and the drawing, I spend so much of my tutoring time just on that, and I see the light bulb going out. Curtis, the students in my class are brilliant, and I knew that too. I had no doubt that they were trying hard. They're the best of the best in OChem, and yet we still have those statistics. So it's not from slacking, it's not from lack of wanting to do better. When you are illiterate, you have no mechanism to do better until you develop the literacy. And we're not developing that piece. We take it all for granted.
Absolutely. Yes, and I'm understanding more and more your motivation for developing such a program for these students. Can you share with us, over all of your years teaching, the patterns that you've seen in those students who perhaps struggled at first but eventually broke through and succeeded? What were the traits that those students had? What were some things that were perhaps different in their learning strategies? What are your thoughts?
I think they were open to humor, right? And open to taking a risk. Say what's on the tip of your tongue. You've got something in your gut. I start calling it your chemical intuition, right? And I'll ask a question and they'll say, I think it's the new, and then they stop themselves because they're not sure, right? So the students who eventually succeed are the ones, for lack of a better description, allow themselves to get over the activation barrier. And a lot of that is being vulnerable, taking risks, meaning put it out there and see what happens, getting started, and also not needing to see the whole picture, meaning that just start, the next step will appear, the next step will appear. So don't let the inability to see the whole picture stop you from starting.
Exactly right. It's almost like the analogy, how are you going to climb a mountain? It's going to be one step at a time. I remember when I took organic chemistry and going into it thinking, okay, I'm ready. And then like by week 2, I was just getting slammed. Every day I was studying in the library, hundreds and hundreds of practice problems, late nights, early mornings. Obviously made it through to be where I'm at today, and it was due to that hard work and that effort and those office hours and great professors like yourself. So for anybody listening who may be struggling through that course right now or a similar one, it is possible to get through it. with time and effort and discipline and with optimal learning strategies. So with optimal learning strategies, what have you learned about how people actually process chemistry or any hard subject using a sort of molecular level of cognition, so to speak? What have you learned about how people learn?
It involves a multisensory approach. It's not just a visual. What you see doesn't go into your brain. So there needs to be some kind of movement or imagination attached to it. And so with that, I really think the storytelling, and there's an audible version too. So when I say I'm tutoring, I'm really coaching, right? So I'm coaching them on what to say to themselves through each step. Like, ask yourself this question and then follow up on that. So, for example, I might say when you're looking at a cyclohexane stability that the cis and trans on the flat version doesn't necessarily correspond to axial and equatorial. And so I'll just say that over and over again so that they can repeat it in their head. And I encourage them to talk to themselves, like say it out loud to yourself so that you can hear your own voice during an exam or in a quiz. So, and then of course, translating into any kind of lab experience that you might have. I used to do a bunch of scent labs at the University of Arizona because there is research to show that the lab where you make esters, the banana oil lab, is the most memorable. And it's not the most memorable because everyone memorizes Fischer esterification mechanism. It's the most memorable because it's the one that has that scent. Right? So there needs to be multisensory approach to learning, I think in any learning, but especially in chemistry, it's viable.
And what are your thoughts on how we can redesign the pathway for pre-medical students getting into medical school so that more people will make it through without losing their curiosity or their confidence? Let's talk about this in terms of mental strategies or frameworks and perhaps even some educational approaches, because I'm sure many students will face these challenges and perhaps haven't faced anything so challenging before on their way to their goals, right? Some of them are smart students that have never really had to struggle through a class. What are the strategies or frameworks or learning techniques that these students could implement to push through those challenges and rise to success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to answer it in twofold. I'm going to answer it what would be my dream scenario and then what's happening right now, right? Because some of the folks that are listening right now probably need the right now. But let's create the dream world. The dream world is if you are going to college to be say a music major, right? And you want to play in the violin in the National Symphony. How old were you when you probably started learning violin?
Probably quite young.
5, 6, something like that. You're reading music by age 7. And if you look at a musical note and look at an organic molecule, you'll see the similarities, right? Visually, they're the same thing. And then there's the audible component of music learning. There's the kinesthetic approach, right, to music learning. So when you are mastering something that is symbolic based, we all know to start at a very young age, right? And so my dream world is that we don't cram this in during 11th grade. It doesn't work. Again, no music major had 1 year of music and then hopped on campus and said, hey, I'm going to major in music. Here's my violin. I don't really remember in 11th grade. I kind of had a bad teacher, but I'm going to go for it. We do this especially with the population that we're addressing today. The pre-med students are sent to university and they have been good students, right? They have all A's. And maybe they got an A in chemistry. Who knows, right? And their community is like, you're so smart, you're going to be a doctor. Everyone's pumping them up, but no one has prepared them for the journey. Again, it's like a marathon where you put the running shoes on and the shorts and maybe Nike sponsors you and you go to the start line and no one told you how hard it was going to be. They had you run a mile and say you're a good runner, right? And so we need to start earlier. No mastery, no professional endeavor starts as late as we start those, especially in the sciences. Engineering might start a little bit earlier even these days, but when we look at physical sciences, chemistry in particular, we give it a nod at best. Some students get around it, and by the time they get to college, they're sunk. And they have no idea why, because they have not been given the story why. Right? Everyone tells them they're wonderful. So then in my office for 30 years, I had Kleenexes everywhere because the tears were there. It's the very first time they had ever experienced academic failure. And that's ridiculous. We need to just start earlier so that they're not slammed in the face with it. So that's the ideal world. If you are in the position right now, if you're in high school, what I would say is take as much chemistry as you can. Don't be afraid of it. Take regular chem, take AP Chem. Put yourself in the language as much as you possibly can, as early as you can. If you're in college, I would really encourage you to use every resource possible and lighten your load when you're taking chemistry, knowing that it's basically two classes. It's the language, actually three. It's the language, it's the content, and it's the lab. So try to lighten your load. Don't take it for granted that you're going to need, to make up for all those hours that you missed, you're going to need 10 hours a week at least, if not more, for one class. So it's repetition, it's getting help, going to office hours, all of that. So I do tutor some D1 athletes and they're struggling, right? Because they don't have that. So I don't know what advisors are telling D1 athletes in season to take OChem, right? There also needs to be that communication is what timing is best for me. Do I want to take this as a postgrad? Do I want to finish my degree in something else and then take all the chemistry and physics when I'm a little bit more mature? These are things that you could do right now.
Yes, 100%. In that dream world, I think a couple good things to consider as well for the listeners is you shouldn't fear failure, because I think a lot of people will be very comfortable in the things that they're good at and they won't expand to different courses, like, for example, AP Chem for the younger students or OChem or whatever it may be, because they don't want to fail. But confronting the possibility of failure is the only way that we're going to get better, and just truly embracing the difficulty that it takes, that you must endure to succeed, right? With studying and the sacrifice to sit down in the library for hours on end and to just learn what you need to learn. A good piece of advice I heard actually from my organic chemistry professor is, it's not a sacrifice if it's what you want to do. So making that effort, putting that time in towards your goal is valuable if it's going to lead to your success, right? So I want to ask you, Dr. Kelley, if we were to think about molecular literacy, or really any literacy for your education, if we were to think of that as cognitive fitness, what would be the training plan?
Oh, the training plan would be to start with the alphabet of science, right, which is the periodic table. So fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. I was a Division I swimmer. You work on your stroke technique at the beginning of every season, right, to develop that training plan. So it's technique, it's fundamentals, it's not speed, endurance. You're not doing anything fast. You're making sure that you can write any formula that is given to you. So you start with those fundamentals. You start with the periodic table as the letters, the alphabet of science. You build words, then you build sentences, which are equations, chemical equations, and you develop a deep understanding of each along the way so that the training is on solid ground. We can't build anything on a shaky foundation, right? So if the foundation is not 100% solid, and that's all the symbols that we need to know, practice in this fitness program, if you will, would be, practicing drawing molecules. How do you draw a molecule? How do we represent 2D to 3D? Again, going back to a sports analogy, if you're talking about drills, drilling your brain 2D to 3D. Huge. If you're looking at chirality and stereochemistry, the wheels come off across the classroom right there. Their brains have no fitness for 2D to 3D, 3D to 2D. So in my current endeavor now, when I'm working with younger kids, I work a ton on 2D to 3D, 3D to 2D over and over again, no matter what it is. It could be an architectural diagram. You build that with your Legos. So take a 2D drawing, make your Legos look like that, and then take your Legos and then draw that. What does that look like on a piece of paper to you? How do you interpret an NMR spectra? That's 2D to 3D, 3D to 2D, molecular models, all of that. So that neural part of the brain is just as important as the molecular literacy part too.
Absolutely, yes. If we were to put some children in that training plan, by the time they're adults, they'd be brilliant. So if the periodic table is the alphabet of science, you've mentioned the value of getting that education in early. So how do you think we should be teaching that language if that's the alphabet of science? And how can a medical student or other medical professional or even a college student use that same mindset when they're learning anatomy, physiology, or pharmacology, similar subjects? What are the basics of that learning process?
I think for me, and I've noticed this as when I'm teaching, you're often surprised by the lack of your fundamental knowledge when you're advanced, right? So say you're a college student now or a medical school student and you understand complex systems, but maybe you forgot your basics, right? Reinforce your basics every year. Go back and look at a diagram of the cell, understand metabolism, understand your Krebs cycle. There's some fundamentals that need probably to be reinforced. And I think that that ability to put on that notion that I'm not too advanced or too sophisticated to go back and test my fundamentals. Because I think if you're going to, again, the phrase I use a lot is the wheels come off. When the wheels come off, it's because there weren't the fundamentals there. So maybe if you're taking pharmacology right now, go back to your OChem textbook and look at the drawings again, or go back to, I know that your time is not something on your side, but I implore you to reinvestigate your fundamentals over and over again, and you're going to be surprised at how much better you understand something looking back. You'll be like, oh, wow, I don't know why I thought that was so hard. That's actually easy, and now I understand it better, and that will help me in advanced pharmacology or whatever it is, or, a pharmacokinetics course or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like in all endeavors, sticking to the fundamentals and really mastering them is key to success. Just like in golf, we've been trying to get good at golf lately. And of course, everybody who tries to get good at golf takes their driver out and swings it for the fences, when in reality, you should be hitting it with a low iron or actually one of the high irons and just hitting it off a tee, getting control of the club face. It's the same thing with education. Getting those fundamentals down is going to help you with everything. Can you share with us your personal philosophy of teaching? I know we've discussed a little bit, but do you see science as an art, as a method of persuasion? How do you approach the lecture hall when you're teaching a crowd of students? What are the fundamentals of your philosophy of teaching?
Yeah, that's great. I look at what I've uncovered in my research as the five scientific literacies and make sure that I'm addressing and strengthening all of them. The first one is observational literacy, and that's just looking at something. And again, this could be in a lab or it can be during, something written on a whiteboard. Are you observing change, right? So can you observe it? And the second one would be your ability to introduce what, we call claims, evidence, and reasoning. Can you create a claim and then provide evidence and reasoning based on that evidence, in a vacuum? So are you able to do that? So those have been around for a while. That's not something new, but they're there for a while. Then what I also tried to strengthen are the third, fourth, and fifth one is the dimensional literacy that I talked about, right? So the dimensional literacy is 2D to 3D, 3D to 2D. Then I think when we talk about numbers, I think about numbers as quantitative literacy. Numbers are there to tell a story. What is your data set telling you? What do these numbers tell you? What does an NMR spectra tell you, right? So numbers tell a story. How are you interpreting and retelling that story? So I think that's really important to have that. Oops, you're frozen. There you are.
Am I back? Everything good?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll go back with, I think I'll go back to numerical or quantitative literacy.
Sounds good. Yeah, I've been able to hear you, so we can just restart at numbers.
Okay. Yeah. So the quantitative literacy is that numbers tell a story. So it's not math, right? I think students see a number and think math. I don't even know what math means, right? They're just numbers. So let's look at numbers as another symbol that we use as scientists to tell a story. And let's look at big data sets, look at small data sets, whatever it is, but what is your quantitative literacy and how do you use numbers as another symbolic way to communicate a message or tell a story? And then the fifth one is molecular literacy, and that's, using the periodic table and the symbols in the periodic table as another form of literacy. So when I come to class to teach, I make sure that I touch on all of those because those five skills are going to serve them better than any instrument I can show them how to use in the lab or any, in the MCAT. Those are the five skills they need, right? They may not need something that's just like a radical mechanism to show this is a dot, right? That may not be as important. I want to give them something that is timeless, ageless, and useful. And those five will serve forever. And so I just keep looking at those.
Yeah, that's great. So the five principles with understanding how to observe what it is you're looking at, and then being able to make adequate claims based upon evidence, having the dimensional knowledge and understanding, knowing exactly why the numbers that you're looking at are relevant, and then just the basics of the molecular science. That's great. That is a foundational way to approach it. I'm sure that's been helpful to many of your students. So there's a lot of challenges in the world of teaching. How do you stay driven to maintain your pursuits and your teaching skills when tradition may fight against you?
Tradition is fighting against me for sure. At some point, I have to take my own advice and become authentic and vulnerable. And when I am teaching students, use storytelling and know that it sticks and know that that's helping to develop their imagination, which again is dimensional literacy combined with molecular literacy. So I have to just do me and know that it's effective. And, you know, luckily, I don't know if I would have had this much chutzpah early in my career, but later in your career, you get a little bit more feisty, I guess. So you can do what's right and what works as opposed to what may appear to the outside world that you're somehow some elevated genius or something like that. Like, do not be you would not be shocked if you came into my classroom and I was talking about Winnie the Pooh being like bromine, right? Like, I can do that now. I might have been a little more scared as an assistant professor to say something like that.
Well, that's good to be able to do it despite the pushback that may be present. I want to hear your perspective too on what you've learned about how people actually process chemistry or any form of knowledge. How do people process chemistry or any hard subject at the level of cognition that you discuss, which is the molecular level? How do people process these things?
They need some connection to it, and it's going to be different for everyone. And that's not a great answer. But what I have found universally that gives you a community of learners is storytelling. So come with a story to your class and tell it and relate it to, maybe you heard something on the news that was not quite right, and you're like, let's talk about, what this molecule actually looks like and, what its, efficacy is. And these are the chiral centers in it. So you could have a daily story and like, again, or it could be something you saw in a movie. It can be a conversation that you had at dinner, or they could be the stories that I create that are very imaginative. I have a spin-off from The Princess Bride, so I use a lot of kind of childish themes because when you lower that theme to The Princess Bride, to Shrek, or something like that, all of a sudden what happens to the students' bodies, they relax, right? All of a sudden Shrek is like, oh, I remember that. That was so good. And then what happens to your brain neurologically when you're relaxed, right? So creating an atmosphere through storytelling that is effective but also relaxing, enjoyable. Laughter also allows your brain to open up a little bit more. So all of these techniques, while they may seem that like, what is she teaching preschool in there? It's really aimed so that the student's brain is as receptive as possible to this information, right? And so that first 5 minutes of class doing things like that has always worked. There's also a trust that develops when they realize that I can have fun and be funny. That trust is really important. They trust me. They look forward to coming to class. It's relaxed, right? And then I know what they're going through is not relaxing, but I can put in a little bit more of that in every class.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, in fact, that philosophy reminds me of sketchy medical, which I use regularly as a medical student to learn many different things, right? And they just use cartoons to explain the basics of bacteria, for example. It's a great strategy and a great technique. So thank you for sharing that. Now, Dr. Kelley, can you share now what is your vision for the next generation, both of scientists and physicians who will learn rather than through struggle, potentially through story, like you've mentioned? What's your vision?
My vision is that students will be applied to medical school and the acceptance rate is going to go through the roof. And then the students themselves can say, maybe I won't be a doctor. It's not the medical school saying, no, you can't be a doctor. I want the students to be so successful and such good scientists that when they apply to medical school, the medical schools will not be the ones deciding. It's going to be the students saying, I applied, I got in, I decided to be an architect instead, right? So I don't want the architect to come from not getting into medical school, right? We don't want that anymore. We want people to be able to choose their own vocation and not have the science classes be the barrier to that. So that's really what I want, because I think that's how we're going to get a more heterogeneous group of physicians. It's going to be open to everyone. And I'm not saying lower any standards, right? I'm just saying if we start earlier and we can actually raise the bar. If we have sixth graders who can balance chemical equations, imagine what they can do then. And so we can raise the bar in education, lower the starting time, and then make it sure that it is actually the individual's decision whether or not they want to become a physician or not the medical school's decision.
Yeah, that's great. Set the bar high from an early age, exceed the standard, and then we'll have more people who are highly capable. That's a great goal. So finally, Dr. Kelley, if you could speak directly to a first-year med student right now, or perhaps a pre-med who is just overwhelmed and doubting their ability to learn, what would you tell them about rewiring their perspective to start seeing themselves as a learner?
That's a great question. I mean, I think what you said, that see yourself as a learner, do some visualization techniques, right? So I talk to a lot of the students that I mentor, tutor, coach, whatever you want to call it. I have them do those visualization exercises. Imagine this is the exam in front of you. Close your eyes. Imagine yourself being successful. What does that feel like? What does that look like to you? What's your pencil doing at that moment? Take practice tests so that you can practice that. There's some degree of performance that's required, right? And the performance is what's graded, and the performance is what gets you through to the next level. So I think as a learner, you can't negate performance. You can learn all you want, and you also have to learn how to perform. So how to perform. What are you doing that morning? How much sleep do you get? What do you eat beforehand? Are you hydrated? Are you rested? Treat it like you're, again, a professional golfer going out. What are you doing that day? What is your mental capacity? When you're taking an exam, are there places where you can rest your brain more than others? Is there like a template? If you know how to draw a cyclohexane chair in your sleep, good, then that's a place for your brain to rest while you're drawing. So all of that comes into play, and I think nobody teaches that's a component of these higher level educational experiences. They're sinking because there's all those other things. They've done the book work. There's all the physiology and neuropsychology behind getting ready to perform, to then do well. So that's the reality of it.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Kelley, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. If a listener wants to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
Sure. Well, like you said, I have a TED Talk. So that's called Molecular Literacy for Ages 8 to 108, and that's on YouTube. And then I also have a website called kidschemicalsolutions.com.
Amazing. Folks, we've been listening to Dr. Colleen Kelley. Dr. Kelley, thank you again so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.